The day my father tossed my belongings onto the front lawn and told me I wasn't welcome at my sister's wedding was the same day I discovered I owned the mortgage to his failing business. He said I was a disgrace to the family name. I say karma has perfect timing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You think that's the worst part? It's not. Because what I uncovered in the weeks that followed revealed decades of lies that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. What would you have done in my place? Before I begin, tell me where you're listening from and who in your life ever made you feel like you weren't enough. Drop it in the comments, I read every single one. The sound of ceramic shattering against hardwood floor echoed through the house that Tuesday morning. I flinched but didn't look up from my laptop. Mom's favorite mug, the one with painted sunflowers and a chipped handle, now lay in pieces by the kitchen island. Dad stood over it, face flushed, veins prominent across his temples. His breathing came in short, angry bursts that seemed to fill the entire room. I said, "Look at me when I'm talking to you, Eliza," he demanded, voice tight like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. I closed my laptop slowly, carefully, buying myself seconds of composure. The invitation to my sister Vanessa's wedding sat between us on the granite countertop, its gold embossed letters catching the morning light streaming through the bay windows. The envelope had been opened, my name conspicuously missing from the card inside. "You want to explain this?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the tremor in my hands. Dad's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Explain? You think you deserve an explanation after what you did?" Mom hovered in the doorway, wrapped in her silk robe, eyes darting between us but never quite landing on me. She'd been avoiding direct eye contact. 4 days now. "I didn't do anything," I said softly. "Exactly." Dad slammed his palm on the counter. "You didn't do anything when your sister needed you most. You were supposed to help with the venue deposits. $3,000, Eliza. $3,000 you promised." The air conditioning hummed in the background, too cold against my skin. "I never promised that money," Vanessa asked, and I said I'd try, but what? "Your sister is getting married. Once in a lifetime. And you couldn't even contribute after everything we've done for you?" Everything they'd done for me. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. What they'd done was let me live in the guest room after my apartment flooded 3 months ago. What they'd done was remind me daily that at 32, I should be more established, more successful, more like Vanessa. I lost my job, Dad. The tech startup I was working for went under. I told you that. And whose fault is that? You should have stayed at Meridian Solutions like I told you to. Good, stable company. But no, you had to chase some fantasy at that ridiculous startup. He loosened his tie, a nervous habit from his 20 years in banking. Your sister works 60 hours a week and still managed to plan her entire wedding. Meanwhile, you can't even hold down a job. The comparison burned, as it always did. Vanessa, the golden child. The corporate lawyer with the perfect fiancé. And the perfect life. Me, the disappointment. The one who took risks, who believed in things, who kept falling and getting back up until this last time, when the floor seemed to disappear entirely. "I've been applying everywhere," I said. "I have 3 interviews this week. I just need a little more time to." "Time's up," Dad cut in, his voice suddenly calm. That's when I knew something bad was coming. His anger was familiar territory. But his calm was dangerous. "We've decided you can't attend the wedding." The words didn't make sense at first, like he was speaking a language I almost understood but couldn't quite translate. "What do you mean I can't attend?" "She's my sister. Vanessa doesn't want the drama. She doesn't need to worry about you making a scene or embarrassing the family by showing up in something inappropriate because you can't afford proper attire." My throat tightened. I would never ruin her day. "Your presence alone would be enough," he said, the words precise as knife cuts. "The Chens will be there. The Blackwells. Everyone who matters in this city. We can't have you there as a reminder of." He gestured vaguely at me, at my sweatpants and university t-shirt, at my entire existence. "This?" Mom finally spoke, her voice small. "It's just for the best, honey. Just until you get back on your feet." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for the woman who once taught me to stand tall when the world tried to shrink me. Instead, I found someone who'd grown comfortable in shadows, who'd learned to echo rather than speak. "I see," I said, though I didn't, not really. Not yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad checked his watch, a tutor that had been a gift from a client. "You need to be out by Friday. Vanessa's bridal party is using this room for preparations next week." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "You're kicking me out?" Where am I supposed to go? You're an adult, Eliza. Figure it out. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks. We've supported you long enough. It's time you stood on your own. I stared at him, this man who'd once carried me on his shoulders through crowded fairs so I wouldn't miss the fireworks. This man who now couldn't bear the sight of me at his perfect daughter's perfect wedding. I need more time, I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. Just a few more weeks until I land something. We've given you 3 months, Mom said, her voice firmer now that she was aligned with Dad. The wedding is in 2 weeks. We need the space, and frankly, you need the push. Dad walked to the hall closet, pulled out my old duffel bag, the navy blue one with faded airline tags from my college study abroad program in Barcelona. He dropped it at my feet with a dull thud. Friday, he repeated. And don't ask your sister for money again. The bag sat between us, a physical manifestation of the distance that had been growing for years. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded once, a short, jerky movement that felt like surrender. They left for work 20 minutes later. Dad to his financial consulting firm, Somerset Partners, the business he'd built from nothing 30 years ago. Mom to her volunteer position at the art museum, where she arranged flowers and organized fundraisers and pretended we were still the perfect family from the Christmas cards. The house fell silent, save for the steady drip of the kitchen faucet. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop marking another second of my unraveling life. I picked up the duffel bag and carried it to the guest room. Methodically, I began to pack what little I had. Clothes. Laptop. The small wooden box my grandmother had given me before she died. A handful of books. My life, condensed to what could fit in a bag not much bigger than a pillow. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my best friend, Maya. How's the job hunt? Want to meet for coffee? I stared at the screen, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. How do you tell someone your family just excommunicated you over a wedding invitation? How do you admit you've been reduced to a liability? An inconvenience, a stain on the family reputation? Can't today, I typed back. Actually, do you know anyone renting a room? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. What happened? Are you okay? I wasn't. Nothing was okay. But I couldn't fall apart, not when I had 3 days to find a place to live and no income to support it. I'll explain later. Just need a lead on housing. Maya responded immediately. My cousin has an apartment above his garage. It's small, but it's something. I'll call him. I set the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed. The guest room, never my room, always the guest room, felt suddenly foreign, as if it was already preparing to forget me. The beige walls, the generic landscape prints, the impersonal throw pillows arranged just so. Nothing here had ever been mine. Outside, the sprinklers turned on, spraying perfect arcs across the manicured lawn. Dad's pride and joy, that lawn. He spent Sunday mornings tending to it with the same precision he applied to his investment portfolios. Once, years ago, I'd made the mistake of cutting across it during a rainstorm, leaving muddy footprints on his pristine grass. He hadn't spoken to me for 3 days. I opened my laptop again and pulled up my banking app. The balance stared back at me, $342. 17, not enough for a security deposit. Not enough for much of anything. 3 interviews this week, but even if I got an offer immediately, it would be weeks before a paycheck arrived. My email pinged. A rejection letter from a marketing firm I'd interviewed with last week. While your qualifications are impressive, we've decided to move forward with another candidate. I closed the laptop again, harder this time. The universe had a cruel sense of timing. The morning stretched into afternoon. I sent out 6 more job applications, made 3 more housing inquiries. No responses. The silence felt deliberate, as if the world had joined my family in turning its back. At 4:30, the front door opened. Vanessa's voice floated up the stairs, bright and bubbly. I tensed, unsure whether to hide in the room or face her directly. Before I could decide, her footsteps were outside my door. Eliza? She called, knocking once before pushing the door open. Mom just called me. My sister stood in the doorway, immaculate in her charcoal pencil skirt and silk blouse. Her engagement ring caught the light, the diamond so large it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. Her expression was a careful blend of concern and discomfort. Hey, Ness, I said, gesturing to the duffel bag on the bed. Just getting a head start on moving out. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Listen, about the wedding. It's fine, I cut her off. I understand. No, you don't, she sighed, perching on the edge of the desk chair. It wasn't my idea to uninvite you. It was Mason's parents. They're very traditional, very image conscious. When they heard you were between jobs, they suggested it might cast a shadow. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the moment she'd stand up for me, her only sister. It didn't come. And you agreed? I finally asked. She had the decency to look slightly ashamed. It's complicated, Eliza. Mason's father is the managing partner at Blackwell and Chen. This wedding isn't just about us. It's about connections. About futures. I can't afford to rock the boat. Right, I said flatly. The almighty Blackwells. Can't have the unemployed sister ruining the corporate merger disguised as a wedding. Her expression hardened. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Vanessa. You're choosing your in-laws' comfort over your own sister's presence at your wedding. I'm choosing my future, she corrected, standing up. Something you might want to think about doing yourself. She glanced around the half-packed room. Mom said Maya might have a lead on a place for you. The swift change of subject stung worse than the uninvitation. Yeah. Her cousin has a garage apartment. That's good. Vanessa nodded, already mentally moving on. Look, once everything settles down after the honeymoon, maybe we can get lunch or something. Sure, I agreed, knowing it would never happen. Once she married into the Blackwell family, our already tenuous connection would dissolve completely. Different worlds, different trajectories. She lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to say something that would make this easier for her. When I didn't, she sighed again. I should go. I have a final dress fitting in an hour. Congratulations, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything. I hope it's everything you want it to be. A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or a ghost of the sisterhood we once shared, crossed her face. Thanks. She trailed off, apparently deciding whatever she was about to say wasn't worth the effort. Take care of yourself, Eliza. And then she was gone, her perfume lingering in the air like an expensive accusation. I finished packing in silence. When the duffel bag could hold no more, I zipped it closed and sat beside it, suddenly exhausted. Not just tired, but bone-deep weary, the kind that sleep can't fix. The kind that comes from realizing the people who should love you the most are the ones who see you the least. My phone buzzed again. Maya, this time with good news. Her cousin Jason was willing to rent me the garage apartment for $600 a month, well below market rate. He needed someone by the end of the week. It's yours. If you want it, she wrote. Not fancy, but it's clean and private. I typed back immediately. I'll take it. Can I move in Friday? Absolutely. Jason says to come by tomorrow for the key. And Eliza? Whatever happened, we'll figure it out. A lump formed in my throat. At least someone still believed in me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Down the hall, I could hear the murmur of my parents' voices, too low to make out words but with rhythms I recognized. Dad's authoritative tone. Mom's placating responses. The occasional mention of my name, followed by longer silences. I wondered what stories they were telling themselves about me. That I was irresponsible? Ungrateful? A disappointment? Or perhaps I was simply inconvenient, a narrative that didn't fit into their carefully constructed world. Around midnight, my laptop screen lit up with an email notification. Probably another rejection, I thought, but I reached for it anyway. The subject line made me sit up straight. Notice of mortgage transfer, Somerset Building, Somerset Building. The downtown office space where my father's business operated. Why was I getting emails about its mortgage? I opened the message, skimming through the legal jargon until I reached the key paragraph. This letter serves as formal notice that the mortgage loan for the property located at 1456 Commerce Street, known as the Somerset Building, has been transferred from First National Bank to Evergreen Holdings LLC, effective immediately. All future payments should be directed to the new loan servicer using the information provided below. Evergreen Holdings LLC. The name rang a distant bell. But I couldn't place it. I googled quickly, finding only a basic website with minimal information. A property management company, apparently, specializing in commercial real estate investments. Another email arrived as I was searching, this one from a Harold Jenkins at Prescott Financial Services, Ms. Eliza Somerset, as the managing representative of Evergreen Holdings LLC, we need to schedule a meeting regarding the Somerset Building mortgage. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss payment arrangements. Managing representative? There had to be a mistake. I had no connection to Evergreen Holdings, no involvement with commercial real estate, and certainly no authority over my father's business property. I was about to reply explaining the error when a third email arrived, this one from my grandmother's former attorney, Douglas Winters. My heart skipped a beat when I saw his name. Grandma Helen had passed away 18 months ago, but I hadn't heard from her lawyer since the reading of the will. Dear Eliza, I hope this message finds you well. I've been notified that the Somerset building mortgage has been transferred to Evergreen Holdings as per the trust instructions. As this transition is now complete, I wanted to confirm that you've received all the necessary documentation. Please call my office if you have any questions about your role as beneficiary and controlling partner. I read the email 3 times, trying to make sense of the words. Beneficiary? Controlling partner? Trust instructions? None of it aligned with what I knew. Grandma Helen had left me her jewelry collection and a small savings account, $5,000 that I'd used to pay off part of my student loans. There had been no mention of trusts or holdings or mortgages. Unless. My hands trembled as I opened a new browser tab and searched for Helen Somerset Trust. Nothing relevant appeared. I tried Helen Somerset Evergreen Holdings and got a single hit, a business registration from 5 years ago, listing Helen Somerset as the founder and sole proprietor of Evergreen Holdings LLC. My grandmother had created a company I'd never heard of. And somehow, that company now owned the mortgage to my father's building. I reached for my phone, then stopped. Who would I call? Not my parents, who had just thrown me out. Not Vanessa, who had chosen her future in-laws over me. Not even Maya, who wouldn't have answers about my grandmother's secret business dealings. Instead, I composed a careful reply to the attorney, Mr. Winters, I'm confused by your email. I wasn't aware of any trust involving Evergreen Holdings or the Somerset building mortgage. Could you please provide more information? Eliza Somerset, his response came surprisingly quickly for 12:30 a.m. Eliza, I understand your confusion. Your grandmother arranged for certain assets to transfer to you under specific conditions, which have apparently been met. The details were to remain confidential until the transfer occurred. I have the complete trust documents in my office. Can you meet tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Specific conditions? Confidential details? What had my grandmother done? I'll be there, I replied, knowing sleep would be impossible now. I spent the rest of the night researching everything I could about commercial mortgages, foreclosure processes, and property management companies. By dawn, I had a rudimentary understanding and a growing suspicion that something momentous had been set in motion. As the first light crept through the blinds, I heard my father's alarm clock buzz, followed by his heavy footsteps in the hallway. The shower turned on. Cabinet doors opened and closed. The normal morning routine of a man who had no idea his world was about to change. I dressed quickly, choosing clothes that made me feel stronger than I was, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, my one good blazer. I pulled my hair back into a neat ponytail and applied minimal makeup. If I was walking into something life-changing, I wanted to at least look the part. When I emerged from the guest room, Dad was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into his travel mug. He glanced up, surprise flickering across his face at my appearance. You have an interview? He asked, almost hopeful. A meeting, I replied vaguely, reaching past him for a mug of my own. He nodded, seeming pleased that I was at least making an effort. Good. That's good. The momentary approval felt hollow now. Yesterday, he'd cast me out like I was nothing. Today, he thought a decent outfit meant I was finally getting my act together. The inconsistency was exhausting. I'll be out by Friday, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I found a place. Already? Well, that's good. He shifted. Awkwardly, perhaps realizing how harsh he'd been. Where? A friend's cousin has an apartment available. I didn't elaborate. He hadn't earned the details of my life anymore. He checked his watch, always his signal that a conversation was over. I should get going. Big meeting with investors this morning. I wondered if those investors knew the mortgage for his building had changed hands overnight. I wondered how he'd react when he found out. Good luck with that, I said, and meant it, though not in the way he assumed. He paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought he might say something, an apology, perhaps, or even just a softening of yesterday's decree. Instead, he nodded curtly and left, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. I finished my coffee slowly, listening as Mom bustled around upstairs, getting ready for her day. She appeared 20 minutes later, already dressed for her committee meeting at the museum, pearls gleaming at her throat. Oh, she said, startled to find me in the kitchen. I thought you'd still be asleep. I have a meeting, I repeated, rinsing my mug in the sink. That's wonderful, honey. Her relief was palpable. Is it for a job? It's with Grandma Helen's attorney. Her hand, reaching for the coffee pot, froze midair. Douglas Winters? Why would you be meeting with him? Everything from your grandmother's estate was settled months ago. I studied her face, searching for signs of knowledge about Evergreen Holdings or the mortgage transfer. Her confusion seemed genuine. Just tying up some loose ends, I said casually. Nothing important. She relaxed slightly, pouring her coffee. Well, that's good. Your father and I were talking, and we think maybe we were a bit abrupt yesterday. If you need more time to find the right place, we could extend. No need, I cut her off. I've already arranged something. I'll be gone by Friday as requested. Her smile faltered. Eliza, we're not trying to be cruel. We just think it's time you stood on your own. You're so talented, so capable. You just need the right motivation. Motivation. As if my problem had been laziness rather than a collapsing tech industry and bad timing. As if being disowned and excluded from my sister's wedding was just the push I needed to magically transform my circumstances. I understand perfectly, I assured her, gathering my bag and keys. You've made your position very clear. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I was already heading for the door. I couldn't bear another minute of her gentle justifications, her complicit kindness. The morning air was cool against my face as I walked to my car, a 10-year-old Honda with dents in the bumper and a check engine light that had been on for months. I'd been putting off repairs, hoping to stretch my savings until a new job materialized. Now, every dollar mattered even more. I navigated through morning traffic toward downtown, where Douglas Winter's law office occupied the top floor of a modest professional building. My mind raced with questions. What had my grandmother done? Why had she kept it secret? And most puzzling of all, what specific conditions had triggered this mysterious transfer? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 12th floor. The law office was quiet, tasteful, with mahogany furniture and muted green walls. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, smiled as I approached. Eliza Somerset for Douglas Winters, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Of course, Miss Somerset. He's expecting you. She led me down a short hallway to a corner office with large windows overlooking the city skyline. Douglas Winters stood as I entered, tall, lean, with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression that softened when he saw me. Eliza, thank you for coming on such short notice. We shook hands, and he gestured to a chair across from his desk. As I sat, I noticed a thick folder on the polished surface between us, labeled Somerset Evergreen Trust. I imagine you have questions, he began, adjusting his glasses. About 1 million, I admitted. Starting with, what exactly is Evergreen Holdings, and why does my grandmother's company now own the mortgage to my father's building? Douglas opened the folder, revealing pages of legal documents, property assessments, and financial statements. Your grandmother established Evergreen Holdings 5 years ago as a vehicle for a very specific purpose. She transferred a significant portion of her personal assets into the company, approximately $2.4 million, and used it to purchase various investments, including commercial mortgage notes. I blinked, struggling to process this information. But why? And why keep it secret? Helen was concerned about certain family dynamics. He chose his words carefully. She believed your father had not always acted in everyone's best interests, particularly yours. The statement hung in the air, both vague and devastatingly specific. What do you mean? Douglas removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly with a cloth from his pocket. Did you know that your grandmother originally intended to divide her estate equally between you and your sister? I shook my head. The will only mentioned the jewelry and the small savings account for me. Vanessa received the beach house and most of the investment portfolio. That was the amended will, created under significant pressure from your father. Douglas replaced his glasses, his expression grave. Your grandmother told me that Robert, your father, insisted Vanessa needed more financial support due to her greater potential for success. Those were his words, not Helen's. The revelation stung, but didn't surprise me. It aligned perfectly with the narrative that had shaped our family for years, Vanessa as the worthwhile investment, me as the risky bet not worth making. Helen disagreed strongly, Douglas continued. She believed you were being systematically sidelined. So she created an alternate path, this trust, that would activate under specific conditions. What conditions? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. If you were ever excluded from major family events or denied financial support that was readily given to your sister. He slid a document toward me. She was very specific. The trust would transfer to your control if you were excluded from your sister's wedding, denied assistance during periods of financial hardship, or otherwise treated as, forgive me, less than by your parents. I stared at the paper, at my grandmother's familiar signature at the bottom. She had predicted this. Somehow, she had seen the pattern and created a safety net I never knew existed. So now I control Evergreen Holdings, I said slowly, which owns the mortgage to Somerset Building. Correct. Your father has been making payments to First National. bank, but as of yesterday, he owes that debt to you, or rather, to the company you now control. Douglas handed me another document. This is the current status of the mortgage. Your father refinanced 2 years ago and took out additional equity. The outstanding balance is $1.8 million, with monthly payments of $12,400. The numbers made my head spin. Just days ago, I had $342 in my bank account. Now I controlled a company worth millions and held the mortgage to my father's business property. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That depends entirely on you, Douglas said. As the controlling partner of Evergreen Holdings, you can maintain the current arrangement and simply collect the payments. Or I could foreclose, I finished, the word heavy on my tongue. He nodded. If payments are missed, yes, that would be an option. The trust gives you complete discretion. I sat back in the chair, overwhelmed by the power that had suddenly fallen into my lap. My grandmother had handed me leverage I never asked for, never imagined I'd need. The timing was either miraculous or devastating, depending on how I chose to view it. There's one more thing, Douglas said, reaching into the folder again. A letter from Helen. She asked that I give it to you if the trust ever activated. He handed me an envelope, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned style my grandmother had always loved. My name was written on the front in her elegant, slanting script. I'll give you a moment, Douglas said tactfully, rising from his chair. There's coffee in the conference room when you're ready to continue. When he left, I broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the single page inside. My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized. The pattern I observed has continued, and you've been pushed aside in favor of what your father considers a more advantageous investment, your sister. I want you to know that I see you. I've always seen you. Your creativity, your resilience, your kindness, these are not weaknesses, though they've been treated as such in our family. They are your greatest strengths. What I've done may seem extreme. Perhaps it is. But I watched for years as your father systematically undermined your confidence, diverted opportunities from you to Vanessa, and treated you as somehow less deserving. I could not leave this world without creating some counterbalance to that injustice. The power I've given you is not meant for revenge, though I would understand if that's your first instinct. It's meant to restore equilibrium. Use it wisely. Use it to build the life you deserve, not to tear down others. Remember who you are, Eliza. Not who they've told you to be. All my love, Grandma Helen. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. My grandmother's words reached across time and death to wrap around me like an embrace. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Laundry's in the main house, just text before you come over. And rent's due on the 5th, but don't sweat it if you're a few days late. The kindness of near strangers sometimes outshines the obligation of family. I thanked him profusely, promising to be a quiet tenant. Maya says you're good people, he shrugged. That's enough for me. Get settled, and let me know if you need anything. Once he left, I stood in the center of the room, keys still in hand, and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I had space that was truly mine. No expectations hovering in the air, no comparisons lurking in the corners, no conditional welcome that might be revoked at any moment. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, arranging my meager possessions with intention. Books alphabetized on the shelves. Plant positioned for optimal morning light. Grandmother's wooden box centered on the desk, a talisman of the one person who had truly seen me. By mid-afternoon, I had transformed the apartment into something that felt like home. Simple, uncluttered, peaceful. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop, ready to face the next challenge, figuring out what to do with Evergreen Holdings and the leverage it gave me. Douglas had transferred administrative access to all the company accounts, and I spent hours reviewing financial statements, property records, and investment portfolios. Grandma Helen had built something remarkable, a diversified holding company with assets beyond just my father's mortgage. There were stock investments, a small apartment building in Asheville, and a vacant commercial property near the university. The company's value totaled just over $3.2 million. My head spun at the figure. Just days ago, I'd been stretching my last few $100s, wondering how I'd make rent on whatever apartment I could find. Now I controlled millions in assets. But the most valuable asset wasn't financial. It was information, and the power that came with it. Around 6 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a man's voice came through, brisk and professional. Ms. Somerset? This is Harold Jenkins from Prescott Financial Services. I've been trying to reach you regarding Evergreen Holdings. The mortgage servicer I'd been avoiding. Yes, Mr. Jenkins. I apologize for the delay. It's been a hectic few days. Understandable. I'm calling because we need to establish protocols for the Somerset building mortgage payments. Your father's company has automatic withdrawals set up with First National, but those will no longer process now that the loan has transferred. I see, I said, buying time while I considered the implications. What do you recommend? We typically maintain similar arrangements for continuity. However, as the new noteholder, you can modify terms if you wish. Some clients prefer to handle payments differently when there's a personal connection. His careful phrasing suggested he knew exactly who I was in relation to the borrower. I wondered how much else he knew about our family dynamics. Let's continue with automatic withdrawals for now, I decided. But I'd like to review the payment schedule and terms in detail before the next due date. Of course. I'll email everything. For your review. He paused. And should we inform Mr. Somerset of the change in ownership? The question hung in the air, heavy with potential consequences. If Dad learned now that I controlled his mortgage, it would upend everything, the wedding plans, the family narrative, his entire understanding of our relationship. No, I said finally. Let's hold off on that notification for now. The legal transfer notice will come through eventually, but there's no need to rush it. As you wish, Miss Somerset. The borrower will be notified of the change in servicer, but we can delay disclosing the actual ownership change temporarily. After ending the call, I sat at the desk, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. Was I being manipulative by withholding this information? Perhaps. But Dad had manipulated family dynamics for decades, wielding financial support like a weapon, using my grandmother's estate to reinforce his narrative of who deserved what. Sometimes the greatest power lies in what you know that others don't. My phone buzzed again, Maya this time, checking on my move. All settled, I texted back. The place is perfect. Thank you. Coming over with wine and pizza at 7, she replied. Non-negotiable housewarming. Maya arrived with food, drink, and the unconditional friendship I'd been craving. We sat on cushions around the coffee table, sharing slices of pepperoni pizza and catching up on the past chaotic days. I still can't believe they uninvited you. From the wedding, she said, refilling my glass. Over what? Not having a job? That's cold, even for your dad. I shrugged, not ready to share the full story about Evergreen Holdings. It's on brand for them. Vanessa's marrying into the Blackwell empire. Can't have the unemployed sister embarrassing everyone. Screw them, Maya declared, raising her glass. To new beginnings and families we choose. We clinked glasses. The simple ritual more meaningful than any family dinner I'd endured in years. Maya had been my constant since college, the friend who showed up, who listened without judgment, who believed in my potential when my own family questioned it. So what's your plan now? She asked, wiping pizza grease from her fingers. Still doing the marketing interview circuit? Yes and no, I hedged. Something unexpected has come up. A potential opportunity I'm exploring. Maya raised an eyebrow. Mysterious. Care to elaborate? Not yet, I smiled. But I promise you'll be the first to know when it's concrete. After Maya left, I sat at the desk again, opening my laptop to the Evergreen Holdings files. The Somerset building mortgage payment, $12,400, was due in 8 days. If everything proceeded normally, the payment would process automatically from Somerset Partners' business account, now redirected to Evergreen Holdings through Prescott Financial. But if anything went wrong, if the payment failed or Dad discovered the ownership change and tried to intervene, I needed to be prepared. I drafted 3 contingency plans, ranging from simply accepting late payments to beginning formal foreclosure proceedings. The latter felt extreme, a nuclear option I couldn't imagine deploying. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy what my father had built. I just wanted him to recognize what he had destroyed in me. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. By day, I attended job interviews, gradually narrowing down options to 2 promising marketing positions, one with a sustainable fashion brand, the other with a tech company rebuilding after the industry downturn. By night, I researched commercial real estate law and monitored Evergreen Holdings assets. 3 days before Vanessa's wedding, the inevitable happened. My phone rang at 9:17 p.m., my father's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it, heart racing, before answering with a calm I didn't feel. Hello? Eliza. His voice was tight, controlled fury vibrating beneath the surface. I just received a notice from Prescott Financial Services regarding my building mortgage. Are you familiar with this company? So it had happened. The formal notification had reached him sooner than I expected. I've heard of them, I said carefully. What's going on? Don't play games with me. The facade cracked, anger bleeding through. The notice says my mortgage has been transferred to a company called Evergreen Holdings. Your grandmother's company, apparently. And you are listed as the controlling partner. That's correct. A beat of silence, then, what the hell are you doing? Nothing yet, I said truthfully. The mortgage terms haven't changed. Your payments remain the same. He sputtered, searching for words. This is outrageous. Helen never mentioned any company. She certainly never mentioned transferring my building mortgage to you. She kept a lot of things quiet, it seems. I kept my voice level, refusing to match his anger. I only learned about it myself a few days ago. This is some kind of revenge, isn't it? For the wedding? For asking you to move out? You're trying to threaten my business because your feelings are hurt? The accusation stung, but I recognized it for what it was, projection. He would have used such leverage as a weapon, so he assumed I would too. I haven't done anything to your business, Dad. The mortgage transferred automatically based on conditions Grandma Helen established. I'm still figuring out what to do with the company. What to do with, he broke off, and I heard him inhale sharply. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something more calculated. Eliza, let's discuss this rationally. Your grandmother clearly made a mistake. She couldn't have intended for you to control a multi-million-dollar holding company. You don't have the experience, the education for this. There it was, the familiar diminishment, the assumption of my inadequacy. Even now, facing the reality that I held power over his business, he couldn't help but underestimate me. Actually, Douglas Winters has all the documentation showing this was very intentional, I replied. Grandma Helen believed I was being systematically sidelined in the family. The trust activated specifically because of how you and Mom have treated me compared to Vanessa. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning. As he reassessed the situation, recalculated his approach. We should meet, he finally said. Tomorrow morning at my office. We can sort this out like adults. I have a job interview tomorrow morning. Reschedule it. This is more important. Not to me, I said simply. My career matters, Dad, even if you think it's less valuable than Vanessa's. He sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. Fine. Tomorrow afternoon then. 2 o'clock. I'll be there. I ended the call before he could say more, before he could try to manipulate the narrative further. My hands trembled as I set down the phone. The confrontation I'd been anticipating had finally begun, and there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next would redefine my relationship with my family forever. Sleep proved elusive that night. I lay awake, mentally rehearsing what I would say to my father, how I would hold my ground without letting emotion overtake reason. By morning, I had dark circles under my eyes but clarity in my purpose. The job interview went surprisingly well. The sustainable fashion brand seemed genuinely impressed with my marketing portfolio and experience with digital campaigns. They promised to call within days with their decision. In another life, this would have been my focus, my primary concern. Now it felt like a sideshow to the main event. At 1:45 p.m., I parked outside the Somerset building, taking a moment to gather myself before entering. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a structured blazer over a simple blouse, tailored pants, low heels. Professional but not trying too hard. The uniform of someone who knew her worth. The receptionist on the 6th floor greeted me with a practiced smile. Miss Somerset? Your father is expecting you. Right this way. She led me down a hallway lined with framed achievements, industry awards, press features, certificates of recognition. A museum of Robert Somerset's success, carefully curated to impress clients and remind employees of his stature. Dad's corner office offered panoramic views of the city skyline, the space designed to convey power and stability. He stood as I entered, his expression guarded. Mom sat in one of the visitor chairs, hands clasped tightly in her lap, an unexpected addition to this meeting. Eliza, Dad nodded stiffly. Thank you for coming. I took the remaining chair, setting my bag beside me. You said we needed to talk. Yes. He remained standing, instinctively claiming the position of authority. I've spent the morning with our attorneys, reviewing this situation with Evergreen Holdings. Of course he had. Dad's first response to any challenge was to lawyer up, to find the technicality, the loophole, the pressure point. And? I prompted when he paused. And it appears your grandmother established a legally binding trust. His jaw tightened. However, there are questions about whether the conditions for transfer were legitimately met. Our exclusion of you from certain family events was private, personal, not the kind of thing that should trigger a multi-million-dollar asset transfer. I glanced at Mom, whose eyes remained fixed on her hands. The conditions were met the moment you told me I wasn't welcome at my sister's wedding and gave me 3 days to move out. Grandma Helen anticipated exactly this kind of situation. That's absurd, Dad scoffed. Helen couldn't have known, she knew you, I cut in. She saw the pattern long before I did. Mom finally looked up, her expression pained. Eliza, please. Your father and I only want what's best for everyone. This situation with the wedding, it got out of hand. We've already told you you're welcome to attend. After you told me I wasn't, I reminded her. After you made it clear I was an embarrassment, a liability. Dad moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. When he turned, his strategy had visibly shifted. Let's put all that aside for the moment. The real question is, what do you want, Eliza? What's your endgame here? The directness of the question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge? Recognition? Restitution? The answer had been evolving since I first learned about Evergreen Holdings. I want what Grandma Helen wanted, I said finally. Equilibrium. Acknowledgement of the pattern that's shaped our family for years. Recognition that I have value beyond how I compare to Vanessa. Dad exchanged glances with Mom, a silent communication I couldn't interpret. If this is about money, it's not about money, I interrupted. It's about respect. It's about treating me as an equal member of this family, not a disappointment you tolerate when convenient. We've always respected you, Mom protested weakly. Have you? I challenged. When have you ever defended me against Dad's comparisons? When have you ever supported my choices with the same enthusiasm you show for Vanessa's? When have you ever made me feel like my presence mattered as much as my absence? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because they were unanswerable. The truth was too uncomfortable, too damning. Dad cleared his throat, shifting tactics again. Regardless of past misunderstandings, we need to resolve this situation with the mortgage. Somerset Partners is expanding. We have investors counting on our stability. I can't have this hanging over the business. The mortgage terms haven't changed, I pointed out. As long as you make your payments, nothing changes. But you could change that at any time, he countered. You could raise the interest rate, demand immediate repayment, begin foreclosure proceedings on a technical violation. No business can operate with that kind of uncertainty. He wasn't wrong. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, and he was feeling the vulnerability I'd lived with my entire life. I acknowledged. But unlike some people, I don't weaponize financial leverage against family members. The barb hit its mark. Dad's expression hardened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. I need to take this. It's Mason's father. Wedding related. He moved toward the door. Think about what you want, Eliza. Really think about it. We can find a solution that works for everyone. After he left, an uncomfortable silence settled between Mom and me. She fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger, a nervous habit I'd observed throughout my childhood. He's worried, she finally said. The business means everything to him. I know, I replied quietly. That's always been the problem. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. What are you going to do? It was the first genuine question she'd asked me in years, not what I should do, not what she expected me to do, but what I would choose. I don't know yet. I admitted. But whatever I decide, it will be on my terms, not his. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or the first glimmer of seeing me as an autonomous adult rather than a disappointing child. Your grandmother always said you had a steel spine beneath a soft heart, she murmured. I'm starting to believe her. Before I could respond, Dad returned, his expression thunderous. That was Richard Blackwell. Apparently, word has gotten out about this situation. He's concerned about the wedding, about the families being linked when there's potential legal conflict. Of course, the precious Blackwell connection was at risk. Nothing could be allowed to tarnish Vanessa's perfect merger of families and fortunes. I didn't tell anyone, I said. This isn't public information. Someone at the financial services company must have talked, Dad snapped. Richard is suggesting we postpone the wedding until this is resolved. Do you have any idea what this will do to your sister? The accusation was clear. Once again, I was the problem, the source of family disruption, the reason plans might collapse. I stood, gathering my bag. I think we're done here. I have another appointment. Eliza, wait. Dad moved to block my path. We need to fix this. Name your price. My price? I repeated, incredulous. For Evergreen Holdings. For the mortgage. For all of it. His voice was tight with desperation. I'll buy you out. Just name a figure. I studied him, this man who had shaped so much of my self-perception, who had measured my worth against a standard I could never meet. For the first time, I saw not the towering authority figure of my childhood but a man terrified of losing control. It's not for sale, I said simply. At least, not yet. I need time to consider all my options. The wedding is in 3 days, he reminded me, as if I could have forgotten. Richard Blackwell is talking about postponement. We don't have time for you to consider options. That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. I stepped around him toward the door. I'll be in touch when I've made a decision. As I walked out of his office, spine straight and head high, I felt a curious lightness, the weight of seeking his approval finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I held the power in our relationship. More importantly, I held the power in my own story. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light. I checked my watch, 3:30 p.m. The day stretched before me, full of possibility rather than dread. My phone buzzed with a text from the fashion brand. They wanted to offer me the marketing position, starting next week. Everything was changing, realigning, finding a new equilibrium. Just as Grandma Helen had intended. The morning of my sister's wedding dawned with a sky like spilled watercolors, brilliant pinks and golds streaking across blue canvas. I watched the sunrise from the small desk in my garage apartment, already dressed for the day in a crisp white button-down and dark jeans. Not wedding attire, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going. 3 days had passed since the confrontation. In my father's office. 3 days of silence from both my parents, though Vanessa had texted twice, once to confirm I wouldn't be attending and once to express what seemed like genuine regret. I wish things were different, she'd written. I hadn't responded to either message. In those 3 days, I'd accepted the marketing position with the sustainable fashion brand, signed the official paperwork for Evergreen Holdings, and begun formulating a plan that was neither revenge nor surrender. A third path, one my grandmother might have approved of. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, "Want company today? I can bring coffee and distraction." I smiled at her thoughtfulness. Maya knew exactly what today represented, not just a wedding I'd been excluded from, but a symbolic confirmation of my place in the family hierarchy. "Thanks, but I have plans," I replied. "How about dinner tomorrow?" It wasn't a lie. I did have plans, though not the kind Maya would expect. The Somerset building would be empty today, with Dad and the entire office staff attending the wedding. The perfect opportunity for what I needed to do next. I drove downtown, the streets quiet on a Saturday morning. The building's weekend security guard recognized me from my visit earlier in the week, nodding as I signed in. "Here to see your father?" he asked, handing me a visitor badge. "No, just need to pick up some documents he left for me," I lied smoothly. "He's at my sister's wedding. Today." Right. He mentioned that. "Big day for your family." He smiled, oblivious to the irony. "You know the way up?" I nodded, thanking him as I headed for the elevator. The 6th floor was eerily silent, no ringing phones, no clicking keyboards, no murmured conversations. Just the soft hum of air conditioning and the faint buzz of electronics on standby. Dad's office door was locked, but I had anticipated this. What he hadn't anticipated was that I still had the spare key he'd given me years ago, when I occasionally helped with administrative tasks during college breaks. He'd probably forgotten he ever gave it to me, one more thing about me he'd dismissed as unimportant. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The corner office looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more vulnerable somehow. I moved directly to his desk, not allowing myself to feel like an intruder. After all, I owned part of this building now, in a way. I wasn't here to snoop or sabotage. I was here for information, specifically, the details of the business expansion Dad had mentioned. The investors he was so worried about. The plans that my control of the mortgage potentially jeopardized. His desk was meticulously organized. Files arranged by priority. The top folder was labeled Blackwell Venture, Confidential. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside was a detailed proposal for a joint venture between Somerset Partners and Blackwell Financial, a new investment firm that would combine Dad's client base with the Blackwell family's capital and connections. The projected revenue was substantial, with both families standing to profit significantly. But what caught my eye was the timeline and the conditions. The merger was scheduled to be announced at the wedding reception, a business deal disguised as a toast to the happy couple. And one of the key conditions was the resolution of all outstanding financial encumbrances on Somerset assets, including the building mortgage. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The rushed wedding preparations. The frantic need to have me out of the house, out of sight. The panic when he learned I controlled the mortgage. This wasn't just about appearances or family image. This was about a multi-million-dollar business deal that hinged on my sister's marriage and my erasure from the family narrative. I photographed the key documents with my phone, then carefully replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on a framed photo on the credenza behind his desk, one I hadn't noticed during our confrontation. It showed my father, mother, and Vanessa at her law school graduation. They were beaming with pride, arms around each other. I was conspicuously absent from the photo, though I had attended the graduation. I remembered standing awkwardly to the side as they posed for pictures, then offering to take this particular shot so a stranger wouldn't have to. I had literally removed myself from the frame to accommodate their perfect family portrait. The realization didn't hurt as much as it once would have. Instead, it reinforced the rightness of what I was planning to do. I locked the office behind me, nodded to the security guard on my way out, and drove directly to Douglas Winter's office. He'd agreed to meet me on a Saturday as a special accommodation, recognizing the urgency of the situation. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked as I settled into the chair across from his desk. "More than I expected," I admitted, showing him the photos I'd taken. "The Blackwell merger explains everything. Dad isn't just worried about his mortgage payments, he's worried about the entire deal falling apart." Douglas studied the documents, frowning slightly. "This does change things. If Somerset Partners merges with Blackwell Financial, the mortgage situation becomes even more complex. The building would essentially become an asset of the new combined entity. Unless I prevent that," I said, the plan solidifying in my mind. "I want to send a formal notice to Somerset Partners and Blackwell Financial, informing them that as the mortgage holder, Evergreen Holdings must approve any change in ownership structure that affects the collateralized property." He removed his glasses, eyebrows raised. "That's quite assertive, Eliza. It would effectively give you veto power over their merger." "Exactly." I leaned forward, suddenly energized. "I don't want to stop the merger. I just want them to know they can't proceed without acknowledging me, without recognizing my position and my power." "Your father won't take this well," he cautioned. "My father hasn't taken anything about me well for most of my life," I replied. "But this time, he'll have to deal with me as an equal, not as a disappointment he can dismiss." Douglas considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll draft the notice immediately. We can have it delivered by courier to both parties today." "No," I decided. "Not today. Let them have the wedding. The merger announcement. The celebration. I want the notice to arrive Monday morning, just as they're returning from the perfect weekend, thinking everything has gone according to plan." He smiled slightly, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "Helen would approve of your timing." "I think she would," I agreed, feeling my grandmother's presence like a gentle hand on my shoulder. She understood that sometimes the most powerful moment is not when you strike, but when you choose to hold back. We spent the next hour drafting the notice, carefully wording it to be legally binding but not overtly hostile. I didn't want war, I wanted recognition. I wanted a seat at the table I'd been systematically excluded from. By early afternoon, I left Douglas's office with the notice prepared for Monday delivery and a newfound sense of purpose. The wedding would be starting soon, Vanessa in her designer gown, Mom in her carefully chosen mother of the bride outfit, Dad making proud speeches about his daughter and new son-in-law. The Blackwells and Chens and everyone else who mattered would be there, witnessing the perfect Somerset family narrative. Except it wasn't perfect. It was missing a daughter, a sister, a piece that had been carved away to maintain the illusion. I drove to the beach, needing space and perspective. The shoreline was relatively empty for a Saturday, most people deterred by the gathering clouds on the horizon. I kicked off my shoes and walked along the water's edge, letting the cold waves lap at my ankles, grounding me in the present moment. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Maya with a link to a social media post. "Thought you might want to see this," she wrote. I clicked the link, revealing a photo from the wedding that someone had already posted online. Vanessa looked stunning in her gown, standing between our parents at the church entrance. All three were smiling, but something about their expressions seemed forced, strained. Behind the perfect facade, something was fracturing. I put the phone away, strangely unmoved. That world, the world of appearances and connections and strategic alliances disguised as celebrations, no longer held power over me. I had found my own path, my own strength. As if responding to my realization, the sky opened up, rain beginning to fall in heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. I didn't run for shelter. Instead, I tilted my face to the sky, letting the rain wash over me, cleansing, renewing, baptizing me into this new version of myself. By the time I returned to my apartment, soaked but somehow lighter, I had a voicemail from an unexpected source, my mother. "Eliza," her voice wavered slightly. I missed you today. I know that probably sounds hollow, but it's true. There was an empty chair in the family row. Your father told everyone you were ill, but I just wanted you to know that I felt your absence. I'm sorry. For everything." I listened to the message twice, searching for manipulation or ulterior motive, but found only genuine regret. It wasn't enough, not after years of complicity in my diminishment, but it was something, a crack in the perfect family facade. A glimmer of authentic emotion. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Some bridges needed to be rebuilt slowly, with careful intention, or they would collapse again at the first sign of strain. Instead, I changed into dry clothes, made a cup of tea, and reviewed the notice once more, making sure it reflected exactly what I wanted to communicate. I am here. I have value. I have power. And I will no longer accept being erased. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cinematic. I dressed carefully for my first day at the new marketing job, a structured navy dress, subtle jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Professional, confident, intentional. The woman my grandmother had always seen in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. The fashion brand's offices were housed in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, with racks of sustainable clothing samples lining the walls. My new boss, Camille, greeted me with genuine warmth and introduced me to the small, passionate team I'd be working with. "We're so excited to have you," she said as she showed me to my desk, a real desk, not a temporary workspace or borrowed corner. "Your portfolio showed exactly the fresh perspective we've been looking for." The validation was sweeter for having been earned on my own merits, not through family connections or obligatory support. This was mine, my talent, my opportunity, my future. By lunchtime, I was already deep into planning a digital campaign. For their new recycled denim line, ideas flowing with an ease I hadn't felt in months. My phone remained blessedly silent, no urgent texts or calls from my father or Blackwell representatives. The courier would have delivered the notice by now, but perhaps they were still processing its implications. The reprieve ended at 3:17 p.m., when my phone lit up with my father's name. I excused myself from the creative meeting and stepped into the hallway to answer. "Is this a joke?" he demanded without preamble, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Hello to you too, Dad. I assume you received the notice." "This is beyond childish, Eliza. You can't possibly think you can block a major business merger out of some misguided revenge fantasy." I kept my voice level, professional. "It's not revenge. It's business. The Somerset building is collateral for a loan now held by Evergreen Holdings. Any change in ownership structure affecting that collateral requires approval from the lien holder. Basic contract law." "Richard Blackwell is livid," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This merger has been in planning for months. The announcement at the reception was just the public face. We're scheduled to file the paperwork this week." "Then you should have factored in all stakeholders," I replied calmly. "Including the holder of your mortgage." His breathing was audible through the phone, quick and agitated. "What do you want, Eliza? Money? Is that it? Name your price and let's end this farce." The question echoed our earlier confrontation, but this time I had a clear answer prepared. "I want 3 things," I said. "First, a formal acknowledgement of my role as president of Evergreen Holdings in all merger documents. Second, a seat on the board of the new combined entity, with equal voting rights to other family members. And third, a public retraction of the statement that I was ill during Vanessa's wedding. I want the truth acknowledged, that I was excluded by family decision." Silence stretched between us, tense and electric. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted from anger to calculation. "The first 2 might be negotiable. The third is out of the question. It would embarrass your sister, damage the family reputation." "The family reputation," I repeated. "That's always been the priority, hasn't it? Not actual family loyalty or support. Just the appearance of it." "You don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "I understand that you've shaped a family narrative that required my diminishment to maintain. I understand that you've systematically redirected opportunities from me to Vanessa because she fit your image of success. I understand that Grandma Helen saw all of this years ago and created a way for me to finally be seen and heard." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him recalibrating, reassessing who I was and what power I now held. "We should discuss this in person," he finally said. "Not over the phone. Dinner tonight." "I can't tonight. I started my new job today." I allowed a note of pride to enter my voice. "I'm available tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock at Riverside Bistro." "Fine," he agreed tersely. "Tomorrow at 7. I'll bring the relevant parties." "No," I countered. "Just you, Mom, and Vanessa. Family first, business second. That's how this should have been all along." He didn't like it, I could tell from his sharp intake of breath, but he was in no position to refuse. "Tomorrow at 7, he repeated before ending the call. I returned to the creative meeting, apologizing for the interruption. As I settled Back into my chair, Camille gave me a curious look. Everything okay? You look like you just won a battle. I smiled, surprising myself with how genuine it felt. Not a battle. Just a long overdue conversation. The rest of the day passed in a productive blur. By the time I left the office, I felt more centered, more certain of my path than I had in years. This wasn't about hurting my family or destroying my father's business. It was about finally claiming my rightful place, not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman of substance and value. That evening, as I prepared for the next day's confrontation, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Dad told me about Evergreen Holdings and the mortgage. Why didn't you tell me? We need to talk before tomorrow's dinner. I considered ignoring it, but something in the direct simplicity of her message suggested genuine confusion rather than accusation. I texted back, my apartment, 8:30 tonight. I'll send the address. Precisely at 8:30, a knock sounded at my door. Vanessa stood on the threshold, still in her work clothes, an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than 2 months' rent on my apartment. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. Nice place, she offered as I led her inside, her gaze taking in the modest but comfortable space. It works for me, I replied, gesturing for her to sit at the small kitchen table. Would you like something to drink? I have water, tea, or wine if you prefer. Wine, please. It's been that kind of day. She set her designer handbag on the floor beside her chair, her posture straight but tense. Dad's been on the warpath since that notice arrived. The Blackwells are threatening to pull out of the merger entirely if this isn't resolved immediately. I poured 2 glasses of red wine, setting one before her. That sounds like Dad's problem, not mine. She took a sip, studying me over the rim of the glass. When did you get so formidable? I've always been formidable, I said simply. You just never noticed because I was too busy being categorized as the family disappointment. She winced slightly. That's not fair. Isn't it? I leaned back in my chair. When was the last time you stood up for me, Vanessa? When Dad compared us, when Mom made excuses for him, when I was uninvited from your wedding, where were you? I tried, she protested weakly. I told them uninviting you was extreme. But you didn't insist I be included, I pointed out. You didn't make it a condition of your participation. You accepted their decision because it was easier, because it didn't disrupt your perfect plan. She stared into her wine glass, unable to meet my eyes. The Blackwells are very traditional, very image-conscious. They wouldn't understand, save it, I cut her off. I've heard all about the almighty Blackwells and their expectations. What I haven't heard is my sister saying, if Eliza isn't welcome, then neither am I. The truth hung between us, unavoidable and uncomfortable. After a long moment, Vanessa nodded slowly. You're right, she admitted, looking up at last. I should have fought harder for you. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself it was temporary, that we'd fix things after the wedding. She sighed. And then Grandma Helen's bombshell dropped. Not a bombshell, I corrected. A safeguard. A rebalancing. Is that what tomorrow's dinner is about? Rebalancing? I nodded, taking a sip of my own wine. I'm not trying to destroy Dad's business or ruin your marriage connections. I just want acknowledgement. Respect. A place at the table I've been systematically excluded from. Your terms, the board seat, the formal recognition, they're non-negotiable. They are, I confirmed. But they're also reasonable. I'm not demanding control of the merged company or trying to extract unreasonable compensation. I'm simply requiring that my role and value be formally recognized. Vanessa studied me with new eyes, not as her struggling younger sister, but as a businesswoman with leverage and clear intentions. You've changed, she observed. Not really, I replied. I've just stopped accepting the story others wrote for me. I'm writing my own now. She nodded slowly, a hint of something like respect crossing her features. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About the wedding, about everything. I got caught up in expectations and appearances, and I lost sight of what really matters. It wasn't enough to erase years of complicity, but it was a start, a crack in the perfect daughter facade, a glimpse of the sister I remembered from childhood, before competition and comparison drove us apart. Thank you for saying that, I acknowledged. It matters. We talked for another hour, tentatively rebuilding bridges neither of us had realized were so badly damaged. When she left, something had shifted between us, not complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a more honest relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles. The next evening, I arrived at Riverside Bistro precisely at 7, choosing to be neither early, appearing eager, nor late, appearing petty. I'd selected my outfit with similar intention, a sleek emerald dress that projected confidence without trying too hard, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my college graduation. My family was already seated at a corner table with a view of the river. Dad looked up as I approached, his expression carefully neutral. Mom offered a tentative smile, while Vanessa nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Eliza, Dad stood as I reached the table. Thank you for coming. The formality was new, a small but significant shift from his usual dismissive tone. I took the open chair, placing my portfolio on the table beside me. I brought the relevant documents, I said, matching his professional demeanor. I assume you've had time to review my conditions. He nodded stiffly. We have. And after considerable discussion, we're prepared to offer a counterproposal. Of course. Dad could never simply accept terms set by someone else, especially not his less successful daughter. I'm listening, I said, opening my portfolio to take notes. We'll acknowledge Evergreen Holdings as a key stakeholder in the merger documentation. He began. And we're prepared to create an advisory position for you in the new organization, not a full board seat, but with participation in quarterly strategy meetings. I kept my expression neutral, though disappointment curled in my stomach. Even now, he was trying to minimize my role, offer me less than what Vanessa would inevitably receive. And the public acknowledgement about the wedding? His jaw tightened. That remains problematic. We could issue a statement that you were unable to attend due to prior commitments, rather than illness. A face-saving compromise for all involved. Still a lie, I observed quietly. Just a different one. Mom reached across the table, her hand tentatively covering mine. Eliza, please. Can't we move forward without revisiting painful history? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation behind her placating smile. She wanted peace at any price, even if that price was truth, even if it was paid primarily by me. History shapes the present, I said gently, removing my hand from beneath hers. And this isn't about pain or punishment. It's about honesty. About acknowledging patterns so they can be changed. Dad's expression darkened. This insistence on public confession serves no practical purpose. It's purely punitive. No, I countered. It's corrective. You created a narrative where I was diminished, sidelined, erased when inconvenient. That narrative needs to be explicitly corrected before we can build something new. Eliza's right, Vanessa spoke up suddenly, surprising all of us. We did exclude her. We did it knowingly, collectively, because it was easier than standing up to the Blackwells or examining our own biases. We should acknowledge that, at least within the family. Dad stared at her, clearly not expecting resistance from his favored daughter. This isn't helpful, Vanessa. Actually, it's the most helpful thing she's done in years, I said, offering my sister a small smile of gratitude. Because it's honest. The waiter approached, momentarily diffusing the tension as we ordered drinks. When he departed, I opened my portfolio again, removing a single sheet of paper. I've prepared an alternative proposal, I said, sliding it across the table to my father. One that addresses both the business requirements and the family dynamics. He scanned the document, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging consideration. A private family acknowledgement rather than a public statement. A full board seat with focused responsibility for sustainability initiatives. And Evergreen Holdings maintains mortgage oversight but commits to non-interference in daily operations. He looked up. This is more reasonable than I expected. I'm not interested in revenge or control, I explained. I'm interested in equity. In having my voice heard and my value recognized. In breaking the pattern that's shaped our family. For too long. Mom reached for the document, reading it with growing relief. This could work, she murmured. This could actually work. There would need to be legal language defining non-interference, Dad noted, already thinking like a businessman again. And the board seat would need clear parameters. Douglas Winters can work with your attorneys on the specifics, I agreed. But the principles are non-negotiable. Dad studied me for a long moment, seeing, perhaps for the first time, not the disappointing daughter who didn't fit his mold, but a woman of substance who had found her own path to power. You're very much like your grandmother, he finally said, something like reluctant respect in his voice. Yes, I agreed simply. I am. The dinner proceeded with cautious negotiation, gradually evolving into something that almost resembled a normal family meal. Not warm, not fully reconciled, but honest in a way we hadn't been in years. By the time dessert arrived, we had the framework of an agreement, one that acknowledged my role in the business future while also beginning to address the family dynamics that had led to this confrontation. I'll have the lawyers draw up the formal documents tomorrow, Dad said as we finished our coffee. Assuming the Blackwells accept these terms, we could close the merger by month end. They'll accept, I said confidently. They have too much to gain to walk away over wounded pride. He raised an eyebrow. You sound very certain for someone new to corporate negotiations. I've been watching you my entire life, I reminded him. I learned more than you realized. A flash of something, regret, perhaps, or missed opportunity, crossed his face. Yes, I suppose you did. As we prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside while Dad settled the bill. Will you come to Sunday dinner next week? She asked tentatively. Not for business, just family. The invitation surprised me, a small olive branch, a tentative step towards something new. I'll think about it, I promised, not ready to fully commit but not wanting to reject the gesture entirely. Outside the restaurant, Vanessa gave me a quick, awkward hug. I'm proud of you, she whispered, the words striking me with unexpected force. For standing up, for not backing down. I should have done the same long ago. It's never too late to start, I told her, returning the embrace briefly before stepping back. Dad offered his hand formally, businessman to businesswoman. We'll be in touch about the documents. I shook his hand, maintaining the professional distance he'd established. I'll have Douglas review everything before signing. As they walked toward their car and I toward mine, I felt a curious lightness, not the giddy relief of victory, but the grounded certainty of having finally claimed my rightful place. Not through inheritance or permission, but through my own strength and determination. The evening air was cool against my skin as I drove back to my apartment, windows down, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal documents to review, professional boundaries to establish, family dynamics to navigate. But for now, in this moment, I had done what once seemed impossible. I had refused to be erased. I had demanded to be seen. And for the first time in my adult life, my family had truly looked at me, not as the disappointing daughter, not as the less successful sister, but as a woman of substance and power, a force to be reckoned with. Grandma Helen would have been proud. More importantly, I was proud of myself. 6 months can change everything. The cherry trees lining the streets outside my office window had blossomed and shed their petals, summer had blazed through the city, and now autumn painted the landscape in amber and gold. In that time, Somerset Blackwell Partners had launched with cautious optimism, the merger complete but still finding its rhythm. Vanessa and Mason had returned from their extended honeymoon. In the Maldives, tanned and tentatively happy. Mom had redecorated the dining room, as if new furniture might somehow erase old patterns. And I had bloomed in ways I never expected. The sustainable fashion brand had promoted me to marketing director after just 4 months, impressed by the digital campaign that increased their engagement by 68%. My garage apartment had been replaced by a light-filled loft in the Arts District, a space entirely my own, decorated with pieces that spoke to me rather than adhering to someone else's aesthetic. Most significantly, Evergreen Holdings had expanded. Under my direction, acquiring 2 additional commercial properties and establishing a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, the kind of purposeful investment Grandma Helen would have approved. Today marked another milestone, my first presentation to the Somerset Blackwell board as the head of their newly created sustainability initiative. The irony wasn't lost on me, presenting in the same conference room where, not so long ago, I'd been considered an unwelcome intruder, a threat to the family legacy rather than part of it. I arrived early, setting up my materials with methodical precision. The leather portfolio Grandma Helen had given me for my college graduation sat on the table before me, a talisman of her belief in me when few others shared it. Board members filtered in gradually, Richard Blackwell with his imperious gaze, Mason looking uncomfortable in his father's shadow, 3 senior partners I'd come to know through quarterly meetings, and finally, my father. He nodded in acknowledgement. As he took his seat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. Our relationship remained complicated, not warm, not fully reconciled, but evolving into something built on grudging respect rather than disappointment and resentment. Good morning, I began once everyone was seated. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Sustainability Initiative's first quarter progress. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the environmental audit we'd conducted across all Somerset Blackwell properties, the energy efficiency recommendations that would save the company 22% in utility costs, and the carbon offset program that would position us as industry leaders in environmental responsibility. My voice remained steady, my data precise, my confidence unshakable. Questions? I concluded, scanning the faces around the table. Richard Blackwell cleared his throat. Impressive analysis, Ms. Somerset. But these implementations will require significant upfront investment. The ROI timeline seems optimistic. 6 months ago, such skepticism would have made me shrink, desperate to prove my worth. Today, I simply nodded, acknowledging his concern without internalizing it as judgment. The financial projections are conservative, actually. Page 17 shows comparable implementations across 3 similar firms, all of which saw faster returns than we've projected. I've also secured 2 government incentive programs that weren't available to those comparisons. Dad leaned forward. Slightly. The incentive programs weren't mentioned in the pre-reading materials. They were just confirmed yesterday, I explained. I've included the details in your follow-up packets. Richard and my father exchanged glances, a silent communication between men accustomed to being the most informed people in any room. I recognized the look, surprised that I had secured something they hadn't known was available, grudging appreciation for the thoroughness they hadn't expected. Well, Richard finally said, if the numbers hold, this could position us very favorably with the Westridge client portfolio. They've been vocal about seeking partners with demonstrated environmental commitments. Exactly, I agreed. This isn't just cost saving, it's market differentiation at a time when clients increasingly consider values alignment in their investment decisions. The meeting continued with technical questions, all of which I answered with the confidence of someone who had done her homework extensively. By the time we adjourned, even Richard Blackwell, who had initially been the most resistant to my board presence, offered a nod of approval. Good work, he said briefly as he gathered his papers. Coming from him, it was practically effusive praise. As the room cleared, Dad remained seated, gesturing for me to stay behind. I did, curious but no longer anxious about his assessment. Whatever he thought of my presentation, I knew its value. The board was impressed, he said when we were alone. Blackwell doesn't compliment easily. I noticed, I replied, organizing my materials without rushing. The initiative has solid foundations. The results will speak for themselves. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. You've done well these past few months. With the marketing position, with Evergreen Holdings, with this board role. Your grandmother would be proud. The acknowledgement, so simple, so long withheld, caught me off guard. I paused, letting the words settle between us. Thank you. I said finally. That means something, coming from you. He nodded, a hint of discomfort in the gesture. Emotional honesty had never been his strength. Your mother wanted me to remind you about dinner on Sunday. Vanessa and Mason will be there. The weekly family dinner had become a tentative tradition. Over the past few months, sometimes awkward, sometimes surprisingly pleasant, always a conscious effort to rebuild something that had nearly been destroyed. I'll be there, I confirmed, closing my portfolio. 2:00, right? Yes. He stood, straightening his tie in a habitual gesture. And Eliza, the Westridge clients will be at the reception tomorrow night. Your perspective on the sustainability initiative would be valuable. An invitation, not an obligation. A recognition of what I could contribute, not what I owed. Small steps, but significant ones. I'll be there, I repeated, this time with a small smile. Should I coordinate with Vanessa on the client approach? That would be ideal. He hesitated. At the door. You two work well together. Better than I expected. The admission, that he had underestimated both my abilities and the potential for genuine collaboration between his daughters, hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology for years of comparisons and competition, but an acknowledgement that his perception had been flawed. We always could have, I said quietly. If we'd been encouraged to support each other rather than compete. He absorbed this, nodding once before leaving me alone in the conference room. I gathered my materials slowly, savoring the moment of quiet triumph. Not because I'd impressed the board or secured my father's approval, though both felt satisfying, but because I'd remained true to myself throughout. The initiatives I'd proposed weren't designed to win praise or prove my worth. They reflected my genuine values, my vision for what business could be beyond mere profit. As I headed toward the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Celebration drinks tonight? I want to hear how you crushed that board meeting. I smiled, typing back, absolutely. The new place on 7th at 7? Maya had remained my steadfast support through these months of transformation, cheering my successes, listening through my doubts, reminding me of my worth when old insecurities surfaced. She'd been the first person I called when I signed the lease on my new loft, the only one who knew about the nervous energy that had kept me awake before my first day at the Somerset Blackwell board table. The elevator doors opened, revealing Vanessa waiting in the lobby, elegant in a tailored burgundy suit that complemented her autumn coloring. Her expression brightened when she saw me. There you are. How did it go? Dad texted that your presentation was thorough and well received, which in his language is basically a standing ovation. The easy camaraderie between us still felt new, fragile in some moments, but increasingly natural. We'd been tentatively rebuilding our relationship, finding common ground as adults that we'd never been allowed to discover as children. It went Well, I confirmed as we walked toward the building's cafe. Even Richard Blackwell seemed impressed, which I gather is something of a miracle. A miracle indeed. My father-in-law maintains a permanent state of mild disapproval as a life philosophy. She grinned, ordering 2 lattes at the counter. Mason's still trying to figure out if his acceptable effort comment about our honeymoon photos was high praise or faint damnation. We found a quiet table by the window, autumn sunlight streaming across the polished surface. Vanessa stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I've been meaning to ask you something, she began, her tone shifting to something more serious. Mason and I are hosting a dinner next week, some colleagues from his firm, a few from mine. Would you come? Not as my sister or as a board member, but as yourself. These are people I'd like you to know. The invitation touched me more deeply than she probably realized. Throughout our lives, Vanessa had maintained separate spheres, her friends, her colleagues, her achievements carefully partitioned from mine. This simple dinner invitation represented a dismantling of those barriers, an incorporation of me into parts of her life that had previously been off limits. I'd like that, I said simply. Thank you for asking. She nodded, seeming pleased, but slightly embarrassed by the significance of the moment. Good. That's good. Oh, and Dad mentioned the Westridge reception tomorrow. I thought we could arrive together. Present a united front for the sustainability pitch. Perfect, I agreed. I'll send you my talking points this afternoon. As we finished our coffee, discussing strategy for the potential clients, I marveled at how much had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been the unemployed sister, the family disappointment, excluded from Vanessa's wedding and erased from the family narrative. Now we sat as equals, professional women collaborating on business strategy, sisters rediscovering each other beyond the roles we'd been assigned. That evening, the new wine bar on 7th Street hummed with the energy of people unwinding after work. Maya waved from a corner table when I arrived, already nursing a glass of Cabernet. Look at you, Miss Corporate Sustainability, she teased as I slid into the seat across from her. Conquering boardrooms and saving the planet simultaneously. I laughed, signaling the server for the wine list. Hardly. But it was a good day. They approved the full initiative, including the community garden project I wasn't sure would make the cut. Of course they did. You're brilliant, and they'd be idiots not to see it. She raised her glass in a toast. To women who refuse to be underestimated. We clinked glasses, the simple ritual carrying the weight of shared history, all the nights we'd spent building each other up when the world seemed determined to diminish us, all the dreams we'd nurtured when they seemed impossible. So, Maya leaned forward conspiratorially, has Richard Blackwell stopped looking at you like you're a communist infiltrator yet? Almost. Today he actually said, good work, without sounding like the words physically pained him. Progress. She grinned. And how's the family dinner experiment going? Still awkward as hell, or upgrading to merely uncomfortable? I considered the question, swirling the wine in my glass. It's evolving. Last Sunday, Dad actually asked my opinion on a property investment he's considering. A real question, not a test or a trap. Wow. Baby steps, but significant ones. Exactly. Mom's trying harder too. She sent me an article about a marketing award the fashion brand is nominated for. She's actually paying attention to what I'm doing, not just comparing it to Vanessa's achievements. Maya's expression softened. I'm happy for you, Eliza. Not because you need their approval, but because you deserve their respect. You always did. The simple validation, from someone who had seen me at my lowest, who had never questioned my worth even when my own family did, warmed me more than the wine. Speaking of respect, Maya continued, her tone shifting to something more hesitant, there's someone I'd like you to meet. He's a friend of Jason's, an architect who specializes in sustainable urban design. Smart, funny, not entirely terrible to look at. Maya, I groaned, are you trying to set me up? Considering your last date was approximately a geological age ago? Yes, absolutely. She grinned unrepentantly. His name is Daniel. At least meet him for coffee. If there's no spark, no harm done. I hesitated, reflexively inclined to focus on work, on Evergreen Holdings, on the carefully constructed independence I'd been building. But part of reclaiming my narrative meant opening myself to possibilities I'd previously set aside while struggling to prove my worth. Coffee, I agreed finally. No promises beyond that. That's all I ask. She looked pleased with herself as she sipped her wine. Now tell me more about this community garden project. You mentioned it involves local schools? As I explained the initiative, enthusiasm building with each detail, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who sat on a bus stop bench with nothing but a suitcase and wounded dignity. That woman had survived, had endured. But this woman. The one animatedly describing urban green spaces and educational partnerships, was thriving, creating, building something meaningful. The next evening, I arrived at the Westridge reception with Vanessa, both of us dressed to project professional confidence, her in a classic black sheath dress, me in a deep teal suit that stood out among the sea of traditional business attire. We moved through the crowd with purpose, identifying key contacts, initiating conversations about the sustainability initiative where relevant. Richard Blackwell intercepted us near the bar, Mason at his side looking simultaneously proud and slightly intimidated by his father's presence. Vanessa, Eliza, Richard nodded. The Westridge principals just arrived. Howard Evans specifically mentioned interest in the environmental aspects of our investment approach. Perfect timing, I replied smoothly. Vanessa and I were just discussing the portfolio alignment with their stated values. Richard's eyebrow lifted slightly, perhaps surprised by the easy coordination between us. Good. Mason, why don't you and Vanessa approach from the social angle? You were at school with Howard's daughter, weren't you? Eliza and I will join momentarily with the sustainability perspective. The casual inclusion, being paired with Richard rather than sidelined, being treated as a strategic asset rather than a family obligation, represented yet another shift in the power dynamics. 6 months ago, I would have been excluded from this reception entirely. Now I was being positioned as a key voice in securing valuable clients. As Vanessa and Mason moved toward the Westridge group, Richard turned to me with unexpected directness. Your father tells me you've expanded Evergreen Holdings' portfolio considerably. The comment caught me off guard, a personal observation rather than a business directive. Yes. We've acquired 2 additional properties and established an educational foundation. He nodded, sipping his scotch. Smart diversification. If you're interested in discussing potential synergies with some of our real estate holdings, my office can arrange a meeting. The offer, a professional courtesy extended from one property owner to another, not from father-in-law to sister-in-law, carried significant weight. Richard Blackwell did not propose business collaborations lightly or out of mere politeness. I'd appreciate that, I said, maintaining professional composure while inwardly acknowledging the milestone. Evergreen is particularly focused on properties with sustainability potential. As I suspected. Something almost like approval flickered across his features. Shall we join the others? I believe Howard is eager to hear about our environmental commitments. The reception continued with surprising smoothness, Vanessa and I seamlessly alternating points about the firm's approach, complementing rather than competing with each other's perspectives. By the time we departed, Howard Evans had committed to a formal proposal meeting, and Richard Blackwell had extended not 1 but 2 business invitations, the property discussion and a sustainability conference where he thought my perspective would be valuable. That went better than expected, Vanessa observed as we waited for our cars at the valet stand. Did I hear correctly that Richard invited you to the National Property Council conference? You did, I confirmed, still slightly bemused by the development. Apparently my perspective would be valuable. She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. High praise indeed from the man who once referred to environmental initiatives as fashionable distractions from sound business practice. People can change their perspectives, I mused, thinking not just of Richard but of all the shifts that had occurred in our family over these months. When presented with compelling evidence. Speaking of change, Vanessa's tone softened. I've been meaning to thank you. For the Westridge approach? It was a team effort. No, not that. She hesitated, uncharacteristically vulnerable. For forcing us to face the truth about how we treated you. For not accepting the role we tried to assign you. If you had just taken Dad's buyout offer, if you'd just quietly stepped aside as expected. She shook her head. Nothing would have changed. We would have continued the same patterns, the same dynamics, never confronting what we were really doing. The honesty between us, still new, still sometimes fragile, felt like the most valuable outcome of the past 6 months, more significant than board seats or business successes. I didn't do it to teach anyone a lesson, I said carefully. I did it because I finally understood I deserved more than what was being offered. You always deserved more, she acknowledged quietly. I knew it even when I participated in sidelining you. It was easier to accept the narrative where I was the successful daughter and you were not. It protected my position, my identity within the family. The valet pulled up with my car, momentarily pausing our conversation. After tipping him, I turned back to Vanessa, recognizing the importance of this moment of transparency. We were both trapped in roles that weren't entirely of our making, I offered. You weren't any freer in your golden child position than I was as the disappointment. She considered this, nodding slowly. Different cages, but cages nonetheless. I'm glad we're finding our way out. Me too. I embraced her briefly, still getting accustomed to the physical expression of sisterhood we'd rarely shared as adults. See you Sunday for family dinner? Wouldn't miss it. She smiled as her own car arrived. Try to act surprised when Mom shows off the new dining room chandelier. She's been talking about it all week. As I drove home through the city streets, autumn leaves swirling in my headlights, I reflected on the evening, not just the business success, but the deeper currents of change flowing through my family. We were all adapting, evolving, finding new ways to relate to each other beyond the rigid roles that had defined us for so long. Sunday's family dinner brought its own small revelations. Mom's new chandelier, a modern fixture that replaced the traditional crystal that had hung for decades, symbolized more than just updated decor. Like our family dynamic, she was allowing herself to evolve, to express preferences beyond what had always been expected. It changes the entire feeling of the room, she explained as we gathered around the table, her eyes seeking approval. Your father thought it was too contemporary, but I insisted. It's perfect, I assured her, noting how the light played differently across the familiar space, creating new patterns, new possibilities. Bold choice. She beamed at the validation, perhaps hearing the subtext, recognition of her small act of self-assertion in a marriage where she had long deferred to Dad's preferences. The meal progressed with surprising ease, Mason sharing anecdotes from a recent case, Vanessa describing a challenging client, Dad occasionally offering business insights without the didactic tone that had once characterized his pronouncements. I contributed updates on the sustainability initiative and amusing stories from the fashion brand's latest photo shoot. As dessert was served, a pumpkin tart that celebrated the season, Dad cleared his throat in a way that usually preceded some formal announcement. I've been considering the future of Somerset Blackwell, he began, setting down his fork with precision. Specifically, the leadership transition that will eventually be necessary. The table fell silent, all attention focused on him. Traditionally, such discussions had centered exclusively on Vanessa as the presumed heir to the business kingdom, with me not even factoring into the consideration. Mason will obviously play a key role through the Blackwell connection, he continued, nodding to his son-in-law. And Vanessa's legal expertise is invaluable to the firm's future. Standard acknowledgements, following the expected script. But then he turned to me, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. What I've realized over these past months, however, is the importance of diverse perspectives in leadership. Eliza's sustainability initiative has already attracted new client interest and positioned us favorably in an evolving market. Her approach represents the future in ways I admittedly didn't fully appreciate initially. The admission that I brought value he hadn't recognized, that my perspective represented a future he hadn't envisioned, hung in the air, significant and unexpected. I've discussed with the board the creation of a formal succession plan that includes both of you, he continued, glancing between Vanessa and me. Different roles reflecting your different strengths, but equal voices in the company's direction. Vanessa reached for my hand under the table, a silent communication of shared surprise and cautious optimism. This was unprecedented, not just inclusion, but equal consideration in the family legacy. We'll need to formalize the details, of course, Dad added, ever the businessman. But I wanted to raise the concept here first, as a family. As a family. The simple phrase carried the weight of transformation, acknowledgement that family came before business, that both his daughters deserve places at both tables. I think it's an excellent foundation to build upon, I said carefully, not wanting to overreact to what still felt like fragile progress. Thank you for considering the complementary perspectives Vanessa and I bring. Mom beamed from her end of the table, eyes suspiciously bright. I think it's perfect. You've both always been so capable, just in different ways. The conversation shifted to practical considerations, timeline, transition phases, integration with the Blackwell interests. But beneath the business discussion flowed a deeper current, recognition, rebalancing, restoration of what had nearly been lost. Later, as we helped clear the dishes, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen, her voice low and intent. Your grandmother would be so proud, she said, squeezing my arm gently. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've done it. With dignity and purpose, not bitterness. The validation, from the woman who had so often been silently complicit in my diminishment, felt like the closing of a circle, the healing of an old wound. I think she planned for this all along, I replied softly. Not just for me to have power, but for all of us to find better balance. Mom nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Helen always saw more clearly than the rest of us. She saw you when we were looking past you. In the dining room, Dad and Mason were deep in conversation about market projections, while Vanessa organized dessert plates with her characteristic efficiency. A normal family scene, unremarkable except for how remarkable it was compared to where we'd been 6 months ago. The next morning, I sat at my desk in the marketing firm, sunlight streaming through the windows as I reviewed campaign metrics for the recycled denim line. My phone buzzed with a calendar invitation: coffee with Daniel, the architect Maya had mentioned, scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. I hesitated only briefly before accepting, another small step in embracing possibilities beyond the narrow path I'd once believed was my only option. As I turned back to my work, an email notification appeared from Douglas Winters, a quarterly update on Evergreen Holdings' assets and initiatives. The subject line read simply, "Helen would be proud." I opened it, scanning the impressive growth figures and the impact report from the educational foundation we'd established. At the bottom, Douglas had added a personal note: "Your grandmother created Evergreen not just as a safety net, but as a launching pad. She believed that with the right support, you would not only reclaim your place but redefine it entirely." These past 6 months have proven her right. The balance she sought has been restored, and then some. I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle around me like autumn leaves, beautiful in their transformation. 6 months ago, I'd stood on my parents' doorstep with nothing but a duffel bag and wounded dignity, excluded from my sister's wedding, erased from the family narrative. Today I sat in an office where my contributions were valued, held a board position where my voice was heard, and was building a family relationship based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles. The journey hadn't been about revenge or even justice, not really. It had been about reclamation of my value, my voice, my rightful place not just in my family but in my own life. The mortgage that had given me leverage had ultimately built something stronger than power. It had built possibility. I opened my notebook, the one Grandma Helen had given me for my college graduation, its pages now filled with plans and dreams and achievements, and wrote a single line on a fresh page: "The greatest inheritance isn't what's given to you, but what you claim for yourself." Then I closed the book, returned to my work, and continued building the future my grandmother had always believed was possible, not because she'd arranged it, but because she'd seen in me the strength to create it for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.